Hello, everyone, and welcome to Educating the Heart. I'm Maria LaRose, and I am your moderator for this afternoon. And how many of you were at the dialogue this morning, Nurturing Compassion? Wasn't it sensational? This morning, the Dalai Lama was in dialogue with a group of students aged 13 to 17. It's the first time he's ever done that with all students. And I had the great luck of being backstage with them, and I can tell you that they were transformed from this experience. So there was a great example of educating the heart. I'd like to start with just a little personal story. You can imagine that as we were all getting ready for this event, that there was a lot of activity going on in our lives in the last couple of weeks, and in particular in the last couple of days. But yesterday I decided when I got up that I was going to go visit a friend who had just had a baby. And a part of my brain was saying, but you shouldn't be doing that, you should be working. And the other part of my brain was saying, but you want to go visit this friend. And when I walked into her apartment and I walked over to the little crib and looked in and saw little precious baby Zachary, I said to myself, somehow you knew this. This is exactly what you needed to do today to get ready for this event. Because Zachary reminded me of why we're having this conversation today about educating the heart. And that's because we love our children and because we want our children to grow in their hearts, in compassion and in peace so that they can live in a peaceful world inside and out. So before I start, I do want to say thank you to week-old Zachary for helping me get ready for my job today. We are broadcasting live from the Orpheum today out to the world via webcast. So hello to all of you who are joining us from anywhere around the world. In particular, I'd like to say hi to teachers who I know are meeting in groups around the province, and I want to name your towns. So hello to all of you from Invermere, Powell River, Kamloops, Kootenay Lakes, which is kind of my neck of the woods, so I probably have some cousins there, Peace River, and Prince George. Welcome to all of you. This dialogue is actually a continuation of a dialogue that started 2 years ago. You probably all remember that in 2004, the Dalai Lama was in Vancouver. He was at the Chan Center. He was in dialogue with a number of people, including his good buddy Desmond Tutu. And there are a lot of precious moments between them. And at that time, their conversation was about balancing educating the heart and educating the mind. And when the dialogue was over, the Dalai Lama himself said how much he had enjoyed that, and that he would like to continue the dialogue, though, and talk about, but how do you educate the heart? And so that brings us here today. And in just a few moments, those chairs over there will be filled with people from all over North America who are experts in this area, people who have spent the better part of their adult life trying to answer that question. How exactly do we educate the hearts? And at the center of that dialogue is the Dalai Lama, who really is a wonderful model of compassion. And you and I, we all get to just observe what goes on there. I think it's going to be quite awesome. This dialogue and other events that are happening in the next few days as the Dalai Lama is in town are actually inaugural events for the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. And this is a center that was founded in 2005 with the Dalai Lama and Victor Chan, and it will be the only building, it'll be in Vancouver, it will be the only building in the world that bears the name of the Dalai Lama. And this is, even though it's in Vancouver, it's open to the world, and people will come far and wide, virtually as well as in person, to find out more and to be a part of educating the heart and nurturing peace through research and education and more dialogues. So I'm going to give you the website address, which is Dalai Lama Center, er.org, and I really encourage you to continually look at the center to see how it's shaping up and to see how you can help to shape the future of the center. Now, as this event was being planned over the last 2 years, since the event at the Chan Center, one of the first groups that came forward to Victor Chan and said, how can we help? How can we make this happen? Was the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia. In particular, Dr. Kimberly Schonert-Reichel, Dr. Linda Farr-Darling, and in fact, they're backstage today still helping. And so we thought it was appropriate that we receive greetings today from the Dean of Education at the University of British Columbia. So please help me welcome Dr. Rob Tierney.
Thank you so much. Where I come from, we usually greet people with good day. But today is not just a good day, today's a great day. We're in a wonderful place, a place that some people once used to refer to as a place looking for a city. What a city we have, and what a city we will have with the opening of the Centre for Peace and Education, the Dalai Lama Centre for Peace and Education. And what a morning. If you were here this morning, you would have heard glorious musicians, wonderful choirs who would have brought you to tears, and then incredible stories and poise and insightful questions from our future who's already here today, our students, probing His Holiness about issues of compassion, and His Holiness giving us an understanding of what compassion means, how compassion applies to ourselves as well as the people around us and to the rest of the world, how, as the statements earlier referred to, that we need to consider ourselves as members of the global world, of a world connected with people in Africa where 1 in 5 die before the age of 5. Or if we're in an audience in Botswana, 40% of you would be HIV positive. Many of you, if you were young children growing up, would be without parents. Learning to be compassionate, and as I welcome you, I feel as if I'm welcoming you as colleagues. We left this morning with a plea that we just don't act as colleagues, but we finish the day as collaborators, working together with compassion in a way that engages us with others and ourselves, doing acts which change this world into a world based upon education and support for others across the world. With that, I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for being, hopefully, our collaborators, and thank you for being part of this wonderful event, and for all of those who organised it, including my colleagues at UBC, but especially Victor Chan and His Holiness. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. One of the people who was in the audience this morning at Nurturing Compassion was Chris Kelly. Many of you know Chris, I'm sure. Chris is the superintendent of schools for the Vancouver School Board, but he's also the president of the Canadian Education Association. And that's a group of people from across the country who are dedicated to improving education in Canada. And Chris is an educator. He's a leader. He just really is a guy who really cares about educating the heart. And so we asked Chris to come up now to tell you something about what he experienced with those filters this morning as he watched Nurturing Compassion. And he's going to come on in a moment. But before he does, we thought we would just give you a taste of this morning's dialogue. What you're about to see is a video, which was a story of compassion, a very personal story of compassion from one of the young people who was up on the stage this morning, Lucy Wang. So here is Lucy's story.
No matter whether one's old, young, rich, or poor, one's kindness from the bottom of the heart is truly a miracle. Ever since my visit in China last summer, I've been truly inspired by my compassionate cousin, Ting. Between the two of us, Ting has always been the more decisive, responsible, and caring one, even though she is younger than me. Since she was 12 years old, Ting has been helping out with the family by babysitting her sister when her parents are busy working. Last summer, when I went back, she was selling ice cream at a street stand. I could barely recognize her. Days of selling ice cream in the sun has left her face dry, patched, and sunburned. I tried to help her by selling ice cream with her, but I got sunburned after one single afternoon. The weather in China was very, very hot. It was over 38 degrees. No matter how thirsty she was, Ting was unwilling to eat an ice steak herself because she wanted to save money. She told me that she wanted to buy a new pair of sandals. Ones on her feet were really old and full of stitches. She wanted to buy a new beach umbrella to have better protection against the sun. She wanted also to buy new school supplies for her sister. That summer, the sudden sickness of a well-known, well-respected old lady shocked the whole village. She needed an operation that cost a lot of money. Learning the news, everyone in the village donated money to help, including Ting. She donated all of her savings, $70. When I heard her decision, I was confused and surprised. I asked her, "What about those things that you wanted to buy? The sandals, the beach umbrella, and your sister's school supply?" She replied calmly, "Those things can wait, but this sickness cannot." I was, and am still, deeply moved by Ting's decision. Even under such difficulties herself, she still wanted to donate all her money to the old lady. $70 seemed to be a small amount, but it shows Ting's caring heart towards the old lady. Inspired by her unselfishness, I want to give back to the community as well. Now, I've changed my perspective on who I want to be. I want to be someone who will help others. Every day, I'm working and trying my best towards my goal. At the same time, I'm praying for Ting, hoping that her dream can come true as well.
And now please welcome Chris Kelly.
Thank you, Maria. And I know what
there.
you're all thinking.
So,
What does the superintendent of schools have to do with educating the heart?
they're going to walk out. My feet are sore. And then I'll introduce you.
Well, hopefully everything. Because as my own self has actually derived from the hearts and minds of multiple others since my first breath, so I am one within a system, an intentional human system that's devoted to the growth and the development of others and the development of their selves. In other words, you and us, for the sake of others. So it's been thought that if I can provide a voice within and on behalf of a system represented by all of us, formally and informally, it might have some relevance. So what an honor it is to be here in the presence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and at exactly the same time to be here among all of you as a fellow human being in relation to what is both essential and possible. The afternoon we have before us promises to be one of remarkable richness in its sharing of knowledge and insight, and then the wisdom that might emerge within that, towards articulating and illuminating and deepening and affirming our understanding, individually and collectively, of what in fact it might mean, or must mean, to educate the heart of humanity, with all of that intentionality. Therefore, to educate the heart of us, of ourselves, and through us, therefore, the hearts and the minds of the selves of others. Educating the heart cultivates self. And we can only cultivate ourself in relation to the selves of others. And that's through our relationships with others, to our own self. And there is the cycle of learning that recurs and moves at the same time through human experience. So thus we learn. We educate our heart, we train our mind with and through and because of the hearts of others. So within every presentation, and in the hands of each distinguished presenter that we have among us this afternoon with the same intentionality, I sense that there is a deep and an abiding principle which actually has become the essence, in other words, resides at the heart of what is their professional and personal human commitment. I believe it's this, at least for starters. That in their mind and in their heart, they understand, as do all of us, that born within every child as person is genius and goodness, all wound up within the sphere of possibility, which is the future that stretches before them from the moment they reach for that first essential bit of their mother's milk, which the Dalai Lama described this morning as the milk of compassion, because it's that essential dependency on the presence and compassion of others that is the source of basic survival in life, and so it rolls forward from there. And so each individual is born, each child born as a person, each of us born with an innate genius and goodness, which, as Mark Kielburger offered in his summary of the morning, as something that needs only opportunity to manifest itself. So this afternoon, we are to be the beneficiaries of multiple, highly informed, deeply thoughtful perspectives on the why and the what and the how of educating the heart. And our time together follows, as has been pointed out so significantly and importantly, the time that was spent this morning with what we describe as young people. And why do we distinguish them with that word young? It's because it was distinguished as such by His Holiness this morning when he said that the importance of the recognition of the fullness of the young person is that at the same time there is the freshness of their promise for their and therefore our future. So there they were in dialogue with His Holiness on the why and the what and the how of nurturing compassion. And through the flow of all that was shared and reflected on that morning, as represented just now by Lucy's story, what became brilliantly illuminated within and through that dialogue was the evidence of this same principle, alive and happening before us on this stage. That is, the innate inborn human capacity for goodness and genius, living and lived by each of these young and whole people in their brief but profound time of learning relationship with His Holiness and with one another and through them and with thousands of others who were gathered here with them in person and via webcast. Thus, they and we learned. Thus, we and they educated our hearts with and through knowing and understanding what is in the hearts of others. So at the very least, I wish you and I wish all of us no less than this afternoon. With this time of sharing, of learning what each of us will and the meaning of what we make of it, I would suggest a question for each and all of us, which was stimulated by and extends from the hope and the urging of His Holiness this morning. The question is this: what is it that is in our hands to do with what we know is in our hearts as it is in the hearts of others? Simply put, as he did at that time, what is it that's in our hands now? So I'll leave that question with you, along with my best wishes for all that this time may offer. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Chris. And Chris will be back later. We've given him another job, which is to keep track of what's happening during this dialogue and to come back later and tell us what he's seen. It is now time for me to introduce the first panelists for our dialogue. We'll be dividing this dialogue into two, and there's a very brief, just a couple of minute intermission in between. And as I introduce them now, I'll just introduce them by name, and you'll learn a lot more about them once they've sat down. So if they are ready, I would now like to introduce our first panel. And Dr. Timothy Shriver. Dr. Kimberly Schonert-Reichel, Mary Gordon, Dr. Mark Greenberg, and Timothy Shriver. Dr. Timothy Shriver is coming.
He's coming.
And while he's finding his way, I'd like to introduce Lorne Mayencourt, who is the MLA for Vancouver Burrard. I hear someone. There! Dr. Timothy Shriver, everyone! All right.
Okay.
We're all happy now. Happiness, that's what this is all about. And I'd like to introduce now Lorne Mayencourt, who is the MLA for Vancouver Burrard, and he is going to bring us greetings from the provincial government, as well as introduce our very special guest as I make my way over to the dialogue.
Thank you, Maria. Well, ladies and gentlemen, honored guest, distinguished panelists, I wish to welcome you on behalf of the province of British Columbia to a very important dialogue that we will have today. About 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be able to work on the Dalai Lama's visit, and I know how much of a great difference that made in our community because of the dialogues happening here. I know that today, this morning, with the young people that were dialoguing with the Dalai Lama, that there were a great many questions that they had and some great wisdom that came from the Dalai Lama. It's just one of the most beautiful things that I get to do in my job, to be able to do something like this. The Dalai Lama has made an impact on my life and perhaps the lives of everyone here. And so it gives me a great pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming His Holiness, the Dalai Lama.
He's got his cap. He's got his cap.
Welcome, Your Holiness. It's so nice to have you. I see you still have your cap from this morning. That's good.
Very good.
Did you enjoy your time with the children, the young people this morning?
Oh, yes, very much.
Oh, good. I'd like to also introduce Thupten Jinpa, translator. Welcome, Thupten. Your Holiness, I was just talking about the last time that you were here in Vancouver when you were presenting and talking to your friend Bishop Desmond Tutu and other people. And I wonder if you could, before we start talking today about how to educate the heart, I wonder if you could just talk to us about your feelings and your thoughts about why we should be educating the hearts, especially of children and youth.
적어야 돼. I mentioned this morning also, I think the very way of our start our life, affection or compassion or sense of care is the foundation. So then our daily experiences, even in dream, someone show us affection, we feel deep satisfaction and feeling of security, right? Security. And even you get some problem, you are passing through some difficulties, or physical illness, that person surrounded by full of care, full of affection, person much happier. Even animal, no religious faith, no philosophy concept, simple mind, but they do appreciate affection. Some people say even plants also, you see, have the feeling or some effect if you say nice word. I don't know. Perhaps I'm a little bit skeptical about that statement. So that's nature. Then I think another way to explain, maybe every existence, including plants, have the right to exist. The basis of existence is peace, without disturbances. So compassion brings peace, positive atmosphere, and compassion is the, I think, ultimately remedy to expel negative forces. Usually, anger, hatred, supposed to force to expel opposite. But I think that always or often goes wrong. Out of compassion and with intelligence, through appropriate measure, countermeasure, we can expel opposite without harming in their mind. Right? Harming the other. Like, I think the compassionate parent or teacher sometimes may use certain harsh method in order to stop your student or their children's sort of wrong behavior. But these come out of compassion, out of sense of concern. So the sensible student or sensible children may not hurt. Physically, may little pain, but mentally, emotionally, not hurt. So, no counter sort of no the negative side effect, negative consequences. Then perhaps, thirdly, many problems which we are facing today. I think since end of the 20th century, there seems Third World War with nuclear weapon, or at least bloc, organized huge sort of blocks. That danger no longer there. But then small pockets here and there, including terrorists are there. Why? I feel that in our society generally, I think we just let out the full liberty of anger. I feel like that. Nobody taking sort of serious concern about emotional level. We just look at actions. Every action comes from motivation. So long, negative emotions, hatred, fear, jealousy, and rather, these there, some form of violence may come. But now we have to tackle the emotional level. And then another question. In order to change our mind, pray those people who believe God, pray day and night, I don't think effect is very strong. And our Muslim brothers and sisters, they pray, I think 5 times daily, Allah. But the problem is still there. And Buddhists pray to Bodhisattva, but the human misery is still there. So I think the Buddhist way of thinking, the Buddhist doctrine, our experience entirely due to our own action. So we should change. We cannot blame on God or Allah or Buddha. We ourselves must change. Change physical. And again, cosmetics are. I think we spend a lot of money changing our face, and including operations, nose or something like that. But this is minor. Real change, I think, should here. And also, I think, in the intellectual level, I think we are changing human knowledge everywhere, west, east, south, and north. But the intellectual side, or information knowledge side, I think we really neglect about serious sort of the research work, how to change our mind, our heart. Not through prayer, not through religion, but through education, on the basis of scientific finding and our common experience and common sense.
Thank you. I'd like now to introduce our first presenter, who's sitting right beside you there. You may recognize Mark. I know he's spoken with you before. We are very fortunate to have him here today. Mark Greenberg is considered a pioneer in the whole area of social and emotional learning, or educating the heart. And so he can give us a perspective on how far we have come, maybe on how far we have to go in teaching children awareness of themselves and awareness of others. He holds the Bennett Chair in Prevention Research in Penn State College of Health and Human Development, and is the director of the Prevention Research Center for the Promotion of Human Development. Mark.
Your Holiness, it's my great blessing to have time to share with you today in this dialogue on educating the heart. And what we know on the scientific end of educating children in ways that will make them more caring and compassionate. And through your own words and actions, you've truly demonstrated for all of us the true meaning of compassion. And if I can have the first slide, I want to show a quote. The second slide, please. A quote by yourself. Even though our society does not emphasize this, the most important use of knowledge and education is to help to understand the importance of engaging in more wholesome actions and bringing about the discipline within our minds. The proper utilization of our intelligence and knowledge is to effect changes from within that develop a good heart. And I think all of us on the panel today will talk about our work and others' work that's all intended to help move towards that goal that you've stated so well for all of us. And as I travel many places, and I meet so many people that have become aware of their own emotional life and learn how to manage and cope with the experience of difficult emotions and how to become more compassionate through the reading of your writings and understanding your life. Like many others, I have been inspired by your own life and work to try to develop programs to encourage the development of compassion and caring and kindness. And it's an honor to be here at the inauguration of the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. It's such an important point that this center is developing as an inspiration, not only for Canada, but globally, to focus humanity on how to celebrate the common desire of all people for peace and harmony. Now, my own work is concerned with the social emotional life of children. And as was discussed this morning, unfortunately many children in communities throughout the world grow up in conditions that don't encourage or celebrate harmony or peace. They experience community violence, schools that are overly focused on reading, writing, and math, and not on the whole child, communities that just aren't able to develop the true potential of children, their social and emotional potential, their spiritual potential, or their cognitive potential. And it's quite a large order to create just and caring schools, and a central task to create these just and caring schools is to understand the developmental processes of the children, how a child develops that can help us to understand how best to educate the heart.
Yes.
And if I can have the next slide, I want to draw one more quote from Your Holiness. You told me at the Mind and Life Dialogue in India in 2000, and that is, you said it's better if one can prepare ahead with preventive systems. Once you already have experienced trauma, it's very difficult to correct it. So I always stress the importance of a proper education for the young child. This is something we can do. This is something that is doable. And there is substantial evidence that this is doable, that we can successfully teach children more effectively, how to overcome and to manage emotions such as fear and hatred, anger and anxiety. Social and emotional learning programs have proven this, that children can develop lifelong abilities such as self-awareness, anger management, impulse control, empathy, and compassion. Now, in my visit with you in India, I discussed in detail how we went about doing this in our own work, and I won't spend time on that today. But I'd like to talk about the scientific evaluation of these kinds of programs. In our own work for the last 26 years, we have been conducting randomized trials. In these trials, we randomize schools. All of the schools agree, yes, we would like to try the program. And then half of them are randomized, and they get the program. The other half do not get the program. There's no other differences. We evaluate the children, both by their own reports, by teacher reports, by parent reports, before the program, after the program, and 1 year later, 2 years later, to see if the program really does make a difference in how children can manage themselves. And with careful randomized trials, we and other scientists have been able to show that we can help children to become more emotionally aware. We can help them to increase their pro-social behavior, their kindness and their caring and their compassion. We can create safer and more loving atmospheres in the classroom. And children's both aggressive behavior and sadness and anxiety decrease substantially. This is very important. But in addition, we also find that by teaching children about their social and emotional life, it affects their thinking skills. They become more cognitively thinking skills. And I know you're very interested in neuroscience of this, and just like our colleague Richard Davidson, we've been trying to understand what happens in the brain at a very remote level. As we know, as children develop between the early childhood and the middle childhood, the frontal lobe develops very rapidly. And as you said this morning, when the brain is flooded with anger or hatred, it can't reason. And what the frontal lobe does, as it develops maturely, is it helps to regulate that emotion so that we can use our reasoning skills effectively for nonviolent means. If I could have the next slide. In the curriculum, we focus on children becoming consciously aware of their emotional states, both of themselves and others, how to put their feelings into words, how to calm down when they're highly aroused or upset, how to plan ahead and think about the consequences of their behavior, and how to develop greater empathy and compassion for others. In the randomized trials, when we do this, we find that it also affects their frontal lobe abilities. And I'll show you, if I get the next slide, so one more slide forward, please, that a simple test, and this is a version of test called the Stroop test. And the Stroop test is a test in the first slide I'm showing you, of reading. So all we ask children to do, or adults, is to read the words they see, starting with red, and go red, orange, green, brown, pink. That's not too hard, it's just a reading test. And next we give them a second version. And as I give everyone the second version, what I want you to do is read the color of the word and not what the word says. This is difficult because we want to say red, don't we? But as our frontal lobe matures, the ability to inhibit our first impulse, our first behavior, develops. And what we found is when children get a social emotional learning curriculum like the PATHS curriculum, that not only do they change in their behavior, but they change in their ability to do a task like this. And their ability to do this task means they can stop and delay and not be caught up, to have more control over their reasoning abilities. And that change explains why they go down in aggressive behavior and why they become lower in depression. This is a form of mindfulness, in a sense, in that what we're doing in these curriculums is by helping children to control their arousal and put into words their inner lives, they're able to gain control over their impulse, and as a result, improve in their thinking skills. And this is a very similar part of the brain to what Richie Davidson has found changes when adults have mindfulness training. Now, we can obtain these improvements, improving children's social behavior and decreasing their aggression and their sadness, but only if we can effectively implement these programs. And this is where public policy becomes so important, because it really requires sustained use of these programs by teachers who are well trained. And this requires administrators and leaders in our communities, influential citizens and educators, that see educating the whole child as the most important goal of education. For such programs to really work, it requires we provide children with significant and regular exposure to adults who effectively model these skills of how to recognize their emotions, how to calm down when they're upset. It's the everyday things of life, really. There's nothing special here. It's, as you said this morning, it's the simple everyday interactions we have that develop our abilities. But to do so requires innovation in the education of teachers. Teachers almost never are required or receive in their training education in the topic we've talked about today, in social and emotional learning. And as a result, we have a system in which teachers are very interested in developing warm and caring relationships and developing children's skills, but often don't receive the required training in their early years of being a teacher. Finally, research shows us that from infancy onward, parents who help their children deal with their emotions, that help them manage their emotions, that model themselves how to manage hatred and anger and disappointment. Have children who show more optical physiological regulation and better competence over time. So our challenge really now is, from a public policy standpoint, is to move our society, move our culture, so that schools see that their mission is educating the whole child. And I'm continually meeting with teachers that are influenced by your work and teachings. We have a lesson in the PAS curriculum that's about forgiveness. A teacher from England talked to me recently after she had taught the lesson. She said she taught the lesson and it talks about what is forgiveness, how difficult it is to forgive, why it's sometimes a good thing to forgive, how it decreases our own burden by forgiving. And at the end of the lesson, she thought nothing had happened. But over the next week, little by little, children began to ask forgiveness from each other. And at one point, a few children in the class asked forgiveness from the teacher for their own misbehavior, for disturbing the teacher. So we don't know what the consequences are of having these kinds of dialogues. So we really don't know what the consequences are of having dialogues about compassion and forgiveness until we do them. And when we begin to open the life of the classroom to allow these, what we see is dramatic change. So thank you.
We're going to move through the presentations, and then if we have time for some questions back to you, Your Holiness, or if you have a response, we'll move through the presentations first. So if you don't mind trading places with Mary. Little musical chairs here. The students did it just fine this morning. Your Holiness, where you have, I've read and I've heard you say that in the past, whereas we relied on places of worship like the churches to educate the heart in the past, that more and more we need to rely on schools and places of education. And our next guest Mary Gordon, agrees with you about that. Mary Gordon has drawn on her remarkable vision and her mind and her heart to create a school-based program that teaches children empathy. And Mary is building a caring and a peaceful and a civil society, one child at a time, through her program, The Roots of Empathy.
Your Holiness, it's a wonderful opportunity to tell you about babies and the milk of compassion. The program that Maria describes brings a parent and an infant into a classroom to visit every 3 weeks to watch the miracle of that baby's development. And in a world where we have, as you talked this morning about, marginalized one another and found ways to hate one another because of our differences, this is a program that brings children together because they build solidarity around a baby. And they find how we were all like that baby. And that baby is a human being. And when they find the humanity in the baby, they learn to forgive themselves and find the humanity in themselves. The idea of the program is then you bridge to finding the humanity in the other person. So what happens in the program, kindness grows, children understand one another, and the atmosphere of learning changes. So I'd like to show you a picture of what it looks like, if we could have the first slide. This is our little hero, and the baby comes with the mother, sometimes the father, and sits on a green blanket. And the children observe the baby's needs and the baby's feelings. And when the baby demonstrates being frightened or excited, the children learn the word for what that is. And then they discover how they themselves have had that same feeling. And all of the children build a caring feeling around that baby. If we could have the next slide, please. This is one of the fathers in the program. And when this father came to the program, one little boy said to him, "Do you play with the baby?" And he said, "Yes." And the little boy said, "Well, what do you play with the baby?" And he said, "Do you want me to show you?" And they said, "Yes." And he's 6'5". He lay down on the floor and he played with kissing the baby's toes. And the children in that classroom were starved for that kind of love, to see that interaction. If we could have the next slide. This is one of our 6-year-old children. And when you see how children understand the little baby, that they understood that this little baby was very sad because the mother had gone. And it's in that relationship of the mother and the baby that we become human, that we learn what it is to be unselfishly loved. And if you've never been unselfishly loved, it's hard to love others. So that 6-year-old child did what many adults that I've worked with can't do. If people who have abused or neglected their children, or domestic violence, societal violence, we don't understand how we're hurting the other person. And that 6-year-old was able to understand that a baby cries not just because they're hungry, but because they're sad. And my sense is that child will grow up to have compassion and to include all others in their life. Now I think there's another slide. Yes, this is a little boy who demonstrates compassion. This is a typical schoolyard situation. His friend got frightened on the top of the slide. And everybody calls names and makes fun. But little Ricky, he says to all the children, "Come down from the ladder. I'm going to help my friend." And he put his arms around him and he said, "We will go down together." Now, we need Ricky in every boardroom and in every war room, because the next slide, please. This is a picture of courage. This little girl had the courage to stand up for her friend when people made fun of her skin color. We have countries who do that, and nobody stands up. In Roots of Empathy, the children learn that if you don't stand up for something that's unfair or cruel, you condone it. So we don't try and change the children who are bullies or mean. We try and help the children from inside come to understand that they have the courage to say or do whatever is needed to make things fair. And children have a profound sense of what's fair. And often we don't listen to them. A little girl who was 9 years old, when she was in the playground, the children made fun of her running shoes and said they were babyish. And this, it's a bad thing. And this little girl, her best friend heard it. And then they came into school, and she worried about it all morning. And when they went out again, she said to her friend, "May I wear one of your running shoes?" It's courage. It's the cleverness of the heart. The example didn't take words. It was a deed. And as you said, prayer is not enough. It takes deed. But it's from the loving interaction that they see with the mother or the baby that they learn the language of the heart. And then they aren't told by teachers what to do. All of these children encourage one another to be kind and helpful in the world. So I wonder what you think about babies as teachers.
Correct.
Sure, would you like to respond? It seems that everybody wants to know the answer.
I think that's easier. Kadu response yaga.
It's probably better to respond immediately because otherwise we
My computer here, not very good. So the previous speaker's sort of points already gone. So response or answer immediately, much easier. You mentioned, the Kasa duty, such sort of training in order to implement or in order to carry large scale, you need or you find a little as a hindrance or uneasiness with political or some other goes on. Take 가르쳐는 저거래. 되게 역시마스 되가래. 변하지 부글이야 참절로 좀 돼야 돼. 라랭께가 되잖아. 즉 칠시버도
Mark, you mentioned that as a result of your studies, there was a very clear indication how the PATH's curriculum actually is very effective. You can see the results. But when it comes to practical implementation of these curriculum in the school, school system, you mentioned confronting difficulties from various sources. His Holiness was wondering whether you could clarify a bit more on what you mean. What are the quarters from where you're facing the difficulties?
This has nothing to do with politics. And everybody wants a healthy society. Everybody wants. And less crime. More peaceful. So then, how? Why? Why is there some obstacles?
You will be as soon as you start talking.
As a response to your presentation, I really today impressed. You already carry some experiment and already witness the positive result and also scientific evidence. So this is the way to promote. But then the obstacle,
So His Holiness is wondering whether you could clarify a bit more where is the resistance coming from, because there is nothing political in this.
Well, Mary can maybe add to this too, because as both people who train teachers, it's usually not the teachers. The teachers want this. The teachers became teachers because they felt they had a gift in having loving relationships with children. But the educational system does not necessarily support that as a primary goal. In most places in the United States and in the world, the education system focuses almost completely on academic achievement. When we look at the colleges of education around the world, we see not one college of education in the world that requires the teachers to have a class on social and emotional development. So they're at the systems level.
Objective
His Holiness is wondering whether the conflict arises from a very important sort of basic philosophy of the whole modern education system, which is the emphasis on objectivity. So
I think not only modern education, but I think the when we utilize the power of investigation, I think objective, unbiased, is the basis.
Very important principle.
I think from the Buddhist, I think Buddhist tradition, unless you carry study or investigation or reasoning with full objective, otherwise you cannot sort of reject or different interpretation, reject the lungi musing tenshi reject chigorba opposition to design 공을 내지 두신 시골로 저서 objective 예산 뒤시고르마도 셰페드 관심이 뛰어납니다.
So for example, even in the context of Buddhist practice, there's a tremendous emphasis placed on the principle of objectivity to the point that the individual has the liberty to reinterpret the explicit statements of a scripture if it conflicts with one's personal understanding or experience.
So if you carry the study or investigation with tremendous faith, then it will not be objective. So respect, different. I think at least a different time. Right? Or judgment, this is good, this is bad. Another field. When we carry investigation, no question of bad or good, no question of right or wrong, just investigate the reality.
There is no moral or ethical evaluation involved.
But then, once we get the full knowledge about the reality, then another level or another occasion, what this is harmful or useful. 자상가 modern education fee now, academic fee now, that changes them, langdo kislegun wa. That di imbeina, that di ang just kasore.
So His Holiness is wondering whether the reason why there is resistance in, introducing this kind of social emotional learning curriculum in the basic education system is because the underlying philosophy in education and academic pursuit is this emphasis on objectivity. Whereas when we bring issues of morality or social and emotional learning, we are already bringing in a kind of a moral, ethical, evaluative elements. So if that is where the resistance is coming from, then we need to look at this problem in a deeper way and tackle it on a different level.
Well, that's a very, very interesting point, and I think that's true in many places that there are ethic and moral issues. One of the fascinating things here, being in British Columbia, not from here, is how the government of British Columbia has embraced these moral issues. So, for example, social responsibility is seen as one of the most important things to be taught in the British Columbia schools. Now, that's quite rare. I don't think we have very few places in the United States at this point in which being socially responsible is an outcome that is at the paramount place in education. But I think we're also seeing a big change. We're seeing now that our ways, our past ways, don't work very well. And I think there's much more openness now to moving these approaches into the center of education.
Not very socially and emotionally evolved right now and move us along. I have empathy for our other guests who would like to speak. But this is a conversation.
Now because the close discussion with first person, now second person. 구미자는 술래비야 소리, 기ging 술래비야. I think yes. in certain field. Now, when we study about basic human nature, I think children, very young children, I think they can demonstrate, because they have no hesitation. Is it to show their natural sort of feeling? So I think we can judge the basic nature of human being, not those sophisticated people. I think the sophisticated people, I think real human sort of good quality as well as bad quality, I think because of their height. And then some kind of create artificial appearances. So that gives us more confusion. that sometimes I do feel I prefer more uneducated people. They are more honest.
More simple. More simple.
So therefore, certainly, I think we can learn much thing from those young children, still unspoiled, right? Unspoiled. But not all things. Of course, that is good.
It seems that children are more capable of naturally expressing what is very fundamental to human being.
I think one, I always mention, one I think is a clear example. Young children, they don't care what color, what religious faith. No. Whether it's that other child, whether come from rich family or poor family, don't care. So long, play together, smile together, completely equal or same. They appreciate more about because of the playful way, playful and smile and joking. I think that's the fundamental sort of value, fundamental value. The marvelous sort of smart sort of brain, knowledge, and wealth. These are secondary, I feel. The intelligence must serve these basic human good quality. State meet on that is. State meet on that is. Meet state that matters in the state give one quotation I saw. The state meant for human being, for people not for the state. I think that's clear. So basic human values are the main foundation. Our education, our religious teaching, all must serve to strengthen, to increase these basic values. Better education, better wealth, forgetting these basic human value is absolutely wrong. So sometimes we take, I think, more serious about man-made way. So
sometimes there is a tendency that develops in us that makes us take more seriously the artificial constructs of the human mind, and at the expense of what is very natural to the human mind.
Thank you, Mary.
So is it sufficient answer for your question?
It's a very rich answer.
Oh.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Our next presenter is Dr. Kimberly Shonert-Reichel. She is a psychologist, but she also is a researcher. Some people say she's a researcher with heart, Your Holiness. She has been taking a scientific look at a number of programs for children that are delivered in schools. One of the programs that she is looking at is Mary's program, Roots of Empathy. And she began her profession as a middle school teacher. She has worked with children who are considered at risk. And now she's an associate professor at the Faculty of Education at UBC.
Excuse the response to second person. Further response. I really appreciate your work because, as I mentioned earlier, young children, that unspoiled. So it is much easier to strengthen these basic good quality right from the beginning as unspoiled. Like water, it is better to keep right from the beginning clean. Once make dirty, then again try to make clean. Double work, extra work. I think young children, as a result of negligence, they spoil. Then eventually these children become troublesome. Then we try to regain their basic value. There's extra work. So I very much appreciate your special care from the early age.
So, good afternoon, Your Holiness. It's an honor to be here with you. Your work has inspired me, and really the focus on compassion and empathy and realizing how we have to start with young children is really significant. Now, I've worked with children for a number of years, really troubled children, children who had many emotional problems, and it was really my work with them that I tried to figure out, how do we educate the heart? What do we do to help educate children like this? And that really led me to becoming a researcher, because I wanted to look for the scientific evidence in trying to uncover things. And I know, like you, I've read that you like to take things apart when you were a child.
Oh, yes.
Cars? Something about a car or watches or things like that?
Car, I think, too big. Too much because of the complication. And also, my driver, a little bit scared. So,
And His Holiness was saying that he used to be quite scared of his driver. So although, of course, he would have liked to pull the car apart, but he wasn't sure how the driver would respond.
That's good. So I like to solve puzzles, and really the Roots of Empathy program, when I began learning about it and learning about this power of an infant to catalyze change, I really wondered, does it work? What is the scientific evidence for the Roots of Empathy program? Mary described it and described the program, but I really wanted to uncover, like Mark has with the PATHS program, about the scientific evidence. So first slide, please. So first, can the infant be an infant be a catalyst for change? Now, do you recognize that picture of that infant at all? Do you know who that infant is? And what I'd like to point out is there's some quotes up there by you, but to me the power is that every human being comes into this world with great potential. Great potential, and we know about that every infant has the capacity to really change the world, to really do something significant in trying to encourage.
Yes.
And so one of the things when we began looking at the effectiveness of the Roots of Empathy program, we did, as well as similar to Mark, randomized controlled trials, comparison group to Roots of Empathy children. And the first thing we started out by looking at was aggressive behaviors. Does the program actually influence aggressive behaviors? And really what I mean by aggression is not the fighting and kicking and biting kinds of things, but really more subtle types of name-calling, teasing, bullying kinds of behaviors. And we first looked at kids in a comparison group, kids who did not have roots of empathy in their classroom. And this is what we found happened to them across the school year. From the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year, they went up significantly in their aggressive behavior. So those children who did not have the roots of empathy in their classroom went up in aggression. Those children who had roots of empathy, as you can see, across the school year, they significantly decreased in their aggressive behavior. So what we found is that the Roots of Empathy program had an effect on aggressive behavior. And now that's a good thing. It's good. You change aggressive behavior, you decrease it, the program's good. But really, taking it from you, we shouldn't just focus on decreasing violence or aggression. We should really look at, does it increase kindness? Does it increase caring? So again, we looked at these types of behaviors in children who had the Roots of Empathy program versus those children who did not have the Roots of Empathy program. So next slide, please. Next one. Yeah, good. So we looked at sharing, helping, and including others. And we looked at change across the school year. So first, let's look at share. This is how much children in the comparison group increase in how much they share. Now, as you see in the Roots of Empathy slide, the Roots of Empathy bar graph, those children who had the program significantly increased in their sharing behavior with their classmates. And again, I want to highlight that we looked at teacher reports. Am I talking too fast? Okay. We looked in teacher reports, but also peer reports. Okay, and the one thing that, if you really want to know how kids treat each other in the classroom, you can't always ask their teachers. You have to ask their classmates. You have to ask their friends. How do they treat each other? So next we looked at helpful behaviors, how much kids helped. And this is how much they increased in the comparison classroom and how much they increased in the Roots of Empathy program. And finally, we looked at including. How much you include other children. Say, come be my friend, come play with me. Here's in a regular classroom, and then you see in the Roots of Empathy classroom what happens. Children significantly, again, changed in their behaviors that included others in their classroom. So then we really...
So I'm saying that the evidence seems to be so clear.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty clear. I tried to get these graphs. Is it clear to you guys too? So we wanted to know...
particularly the contrast seems to be very high.
Yes, it is very, very high. So we wanted to see, well, I really wanted to, what is it about bringing a baby in a classroom that might change children so significantly? And I started to look at what are the kind of activities in which children engage when they're in the Roots of Empathy program. Next slide. I'm going to give you one example. So here is baby Emma, and she's one of the Roots of Empathy babies in a classroom with children who are 7 years old, second grade. And one of the activities the teacher did is the children brainstormed or came up with a whole list of different words they thought that Emma would learn during her first 2 years of life. So just wrote on the board, what are all the words we as a class think that Emma will learn? And then each child took one of the words and took a piece of fabric and drew the picture of their word and wrote the word. And the teacher took all of the pieces of fabric and sewed them together to make a blanket or a quilt for the baby. And the children as a class presented the blanket to the mother and their baby for Christmas. Throughout the Roots of Empathy program, the children have activities in which they engage collectively as a group to benefit the baby. So, for example, another class, it was quite funny, the kids were in 5th grade or about 10 years of age. They wrote letters to their baby of how to survive grade 5. And then they sealed the letters and gave them to the mom of the baby to have their baby open when he was going to start 5th grade. So those are... So one of the things we really ask, though, is does the classroom...
Sorry.
I see.
And so one thing, I know another researcher that you've met, Irvin Staub, who talks about when we engage people collectively in activities that benefit another human being, we develop something called a pro-social value orientation. So last but not least, I want to show you what happens in a Roots of Empathy classroom and how much children feel part of a caring community. Again, the comparison classroom actually over the school year decreases in caring and feeling a caring environment, and whereas the Roots of Empathy kids increase in how much they see a caring environment. So again, there's something about this program of bringing a baby into a classroom that somehow not only makes you more caring for each other, but makes you feel more part of a caring community. Thank you.
근데 상불 차르디 야게 침베 갱기 보크라 끼우르 좀도.
So His Holiness is wondering whether you have, done the next kind of, test is as a result of, since these changes are very significant and you can observe them, as a result of these changes, for example, those who receive the Roots of Empathy program, and as a result of increasing pro-social and emotional activity or empathy, have you also measured whether they are, as individuals, children, happier?
Because I believe more compassionate heart, more compassionate act, not only brings some benefit to other, but himself or herself. I think first the benefit goes to oneself. This is my fundamental belief. So you see people, sometimes you see, get the impression, practice compassion, helping other is something good for other, but the person himself or herself, not necessarily. There's a benefit, and in fact, more burden, more sort of sacrifice or more worry out of other suffering. If forget, then unless something happened onto you, no botheration about other. So I want to carry some sort of research. How much benefit to himself or herself out of helping other? Naturally, as a result of helping other, bring more friend, more friendship. So that definitely brings inner sort of, I think, reduced fear, isn't it? No doubt. So as a result, I think more happier, more self-confidence, and also get the feeling I'm something useful. So that gives inner strength, self-confidence, isn't it? So in order to combat, you see, those obstacles, we need, you see, these data.
Our next guest is the chairman of the Special Olympics. Dr. Timothy Shriver has been a high school teacher, he's been a counselor, and then he went on to establish an organization that's called CASTLE, Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. This is an organization whose vision is to have a world where schools, families, and communities work together to nurture the social and emotional and academic performance of children. So far we've been talking about programs that have been delivered in schools, and Timothy's going to talk to us about what happens to young people when they're actually in the community doing.
Community service.
No, much stuff.
So here's the good news. The good news is...
You are now.
Sorry. The good news is that the remarks I was going to make, you have just made.
Well, thank you very much, Tim.
So I feel flattered, but I also feel preempted, but happily so. Your Holiness, let me just say very briefly that the question you asked of Mark and Mary and all of us about what are the obstacles to the implementation, to the successful implementation of high-quality programs that educate the heart is a very, very important question. And I believe that there are many, many obstacles, many of which we are only beginning to understand. There's the obstacle that some of this is perceived to be religion.
Yes.
There's the obstacle that some of it is perceived to be private and therefore not appropriate for public discussion. There's the obstacle that it is not, as you said, objective and therefore can't be taught. There's the obstacle that in years past, I believe, most efforts, many programs designed to educate the heart were not very good. They were not successful. They were considered flimsy or less quality than traditional academic instruction. And so that has created in North America and around the world many obstacles to bringing teachers and communities and educators to this work. One way to approach opening the door is through service projects. Service learning, it is now being called. And my work has been in part as an educator, but also as a person working with people with intellectual disabilities to promote service. And so let me share with you just a thought, and maybe start with a story. And it comes from a personal story. My own sons were involved in service through the Special Olympics movement. They were volunteering at a local basketball program as coaches and as athletes themselves, playing together with peers with intellectual disabilities. And after a practice one Saturday, I was driving them home. And I thought to myself, why are they doing this? What's the benefit to them? Are they just doing it for me? So I asked, how was it this morning? I said to my son Sam. And he said, fine. Can you turn up the radio, Dad? And I said to my other son, no, Tim, no, really, what do you really think of this whole experience of service? And he said, it's good. So I said, no, I really want to know what you think. No answer. So I turn off the radio. What did you do that for? That my children saying to me. I said, I want to know what you're getting out of this. And my son Sam says, it's fun, Dad. I said, fun? I said, do you believe that it's fun? Yes. Can you turn the radio back on? So finally I said, I'm not turning the radio on until you tell me what you really think. So my 11-year-old son reaches forward like this, and he says, look, Dad, if you said you were going to take me to Disney World, that would be the best news I could have. That would be so much fun. We would have the best time. And he said, then we'd get home, and it would be over, and it would be terrible, because it would all be over, and I'd be back at school. And then he says, when I go to work with the athletes at Special Olympics, that's the kind of fun that lasts.
진짜. 처음 단계가.
I forgot to put up the slide. Could you put up the first slide? Now, this is not my son, but the reason I put this picture up is to ask and invite your insights on this question. There are two people in this picture. The person on the left is helping. He's a volunteer. The person on the right is a Special Olympics athlete.
Left, right,
Can't tell, right? Now, what people typically say when they get involved in service is very common reaction. They say, I got back more than I gave. So they say, I got back more than I gave. But this is the point you were making. What do they get back? What is, if you go back to that slide, what is the experience that the person on the left is getting back? And for those of you who are educators or family members, citizens, you probably have said this. I volunteered somewhere, soup kitchen, wherever you might have volunteered, and you say, oh, I got back so much. I believe, as you have already said much more articulately, there is a sense of openness, a sense of losing your fear of difference, of seeing in someone else who is suffering, maybe, yourself, and your capacity to be strong, your capacity not to be afraid of your own weakness. Many, many lessons. But in education now, it's not enough just to say interesting or passionate things. We have to be more scientific, as you have said. We have to understand these experiences and create a science, a discipline, if you will, of this type of education. So Castle, the next slide, has created a framework that is designed for educators, not designed for parents, or maybe not designed for volunteers, but for educators. So it has all of these elements of educating the heart. And you see in this slide many of them. I won't go through them all, but self-awareness, an awareness of one's own feelings, one's own current state, social awareness, an awareness of other people's feelings, empathy, an understanding of how other people are receiving you. Self-management, can you handle your emotions? Can you regulate them? Can you control them? Can you calm down? These are elements that can be taught in this framework. Relationship skills. Can you engage with another? Can you be reciprocal? Can you be empathic? Can you understand that conflict will arise? Can you control your emotions in conflict? All of these are now being framed through Castle for educators to begin to analyze instruction, measure outcomes, train educators, so that we will no longer have to answer the question, what is it? How do you teach it? Does it work? What are its outcomes? And the most important question, why bother? So my invitation is to invite you to share more of what happens in these reciprocal relationships for the person who starts out as the giver. So if I were to say to you, for instance, as a child, do you remember being caring for someone else? And can you reconstruct, can any of us remember what we got back? This is the language in English. You know, it's not very eloquent language, but it gets the point across. We get something back. And I think, just to close and then to invite your comments, I would share a short speech that was given by a high school student with Down syndrome. And he was invited in his high school last year to give the graduation speech by his classmates. And his speech is only 2 minutes long, and I just will read not even half. And he gave this speech to the whole school. And he says, "My name is Troy Daniels, but my friends call me TD. I have Down syndrome. Not too long ago, people with disabilities could not go to school. They had to go to a special school. They could not have real friends. They called people like me a retard. That breaks my heart. When I came to school, there was a law that says all kids go to school in the place where they live. I started school right here in Northfield with all the senior class. We were little kids together. The law says I can come to school, but no law can make me have friends. Then some kids started to think that I was okay. First, it was just 1 or 2 kids that were nice to me. They found out I cared about them and they cared about me. I told them I want real friends. They called me friend and made sure that I was in everything at school. I want all people to know and to see that these students I call my friends are the real teachers of life. They are showing you how it should be. I am a person with a disability. The law says that I am included. But it is my friends who say, TD, come sit by me.
Oh.
Last word.
Thank you, Tim. Your Holiness and everyone else, we are going to now trade panels. And Tim and Mary and Kim and Mark, would you please join me in thanking them? And they will be coming back up later. But we're not going to take an actual intermission, so that means that if people would stay in their seats, that would be great. But while we're doing the switch, I would draw your attention to the large screen, because there's a lovely poem that we're going to put up on the screen, and it's called Children's Wishes for a Baby. And this actually was inspired by Mary Gordon's work, because as a part of Roots of Empathy, the children are asked to tell their teacher what they wish for the future for the baby. And Dr. Clyde Hertzman, who will be coming up in a minute, saw all of these statements and said it's like a poem, and he wanted to make a poem. And so he took that same question to children around the world, to Eritrea, to India, and he has created this poem that's called Children's Wish for a Baby. So while we are saying goodbye to this panel, and the next panel is lining up, we'll just look at that for a minute. Thank you so much. We'll see you all in a little bit. All right, everyone, we're ready to start again. I hope you enjoyed that poem. You can see that our panelists have already seated themselves, so I will introduce them as they take their turn. Our next presenter's current research explores how people develop character and a sense of purpose in their work, in their family, in their community, in their relationship. He has also written a lot about how to educate for moral and ethical understanding. He also helps schools and communities foster adolescent moral development. Dr. Bill Damon is a professor of education and a director of the Center of Adolescence at Stanford University.
Thank you. Your Holiness, several people today have talked about how all young people have a capacity for empathy, a great capacity for compassion. And it is true that the scientific research that's been done has demonstrated that every child is born with this capacity. But we know, and if I could have the first slide, we know that, of course, some young people, or the second slide now, please, we know that some young people expand this innate capacity, and other young people lose it or diminish it, or it doesn't grow, it doesn't develop further. And the question that we educators need to ask is how we can help young people develop this initial feeling towards caring and empathy and compassion, how they can develop that into a true commitment to be compassionate, whether they know the person, whether they even are friendly towards the person, whoever the person is. How do you have a commitment to be compassionate? And the research that we have done indicates that one of the answers to that question is if young people have something that they're trying to accomplish, a purpose that is dedicated towards improving the world, improving the lots of other people. And when young people have a sense of purpose, when they've found a sense of purpose, we find that they have both a sense of self-confidence and assuredness, but also, paradoxically, a sense of humility. That they're open, they learn, they are full of wonder, and they listen, and they can develop the compassion even more because they pay attention to the needs of other people. I want to give one example, if I could have the next slide. This is a very famous historical example of a girl in the United States. The psychiatrist Robert Coles has written about her. Her name is Ruby Bridges, and she was one of the children who broke the color barrier in our segregated schools back in the 1950s and 1960s. She was very courageous. She went to school in an all-white classroom, and many of the people living in the community were very hateful. They demonstrated against her, and they waved signs insulting her. And there was even one person that lifted up a coffin, a wooden coffin with a little black doll in it to indicate that this was a threat to her life. And yet, if you could put the slide back up, if you see Ruby at the time, you can see her smile. And you talked, Your Holiness, about the joyfulness sometimes that people feel even when they're under conditions of great anxiety and stress. What Ruby did to help her get through this very difficult time, she prayed for the people who were tormenting her. This was a 6-year-old girl. She had the sense, the moral sense, to pray for the welfare of the people who were taunting her and being just horribly hateful towards her. Some young people have this capacity. It's astonishing. We have studied young people who have, at the age of 12, been very moved at hearing that young children in Africa don't have enough water to drink. And so they raise money to build drinking wells in Africa, and they give their own allowance for this. We have found young people who a friend has died of cancer, or perhaps their father has died of cancer. They drop everything they're doing and campaign for cancer research and raise money for that. Young people who are very concerned about the environment and dedicate years of their lives to cleaning up the world. Some of these children are as young as 8, 10, 12, 16 years of age. They have a great capacity for commitment. If I could have the next slide. We've studied lots of young people in the United States, and we find about 1 in 5, about 20%, and it's in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, have a strong sense of purpose. They understand that justice, that peace, that environmental preservation are worth sacrificing for. And yet we find that many, all of the other boxes of statistics are percentages of young people that do not have this strong sense of purpose. And yet, only about a quarter, the young folks that ended up in the lower left-hand box, have no discernible sense of purpose. And these are kids that really live for the moment. They talk about, somebody earlier today mentioned apathy. One of them said, apathy, that works pretty well for me. I'm having a pretty good time being apathetic. That's a quote from one of our subjects. Lots of them say, I just live for the moment. But that's only about 1 in 5, 1 in 4. The other young people, and they're about 60%, are searching. They're grasping. They really want to find something, but they haven't found it yet. And that is the role of education. That's the role of parenting. And if I could have the next slide, please. We have found that the types of purpose that can move young people, that you can educate young people towards, include family, believing that you want to contribute to your family or you want to raise a family, work, faith, art, charity, and political engagement. And we find that in those percentages in the United States that young children or young people, adolescents, are gravitating towards these categories in the percentages that I've given. So family is a very galvanizing force. A lot of young folks find meaning and purpose in work. About 15% are devout in some faith, and smaller percentages in the other categories mentioned. I will say that the political civic engagement is disappointingly low, that we wish that more young folks were engaged in being citizens, and we hope to do something about that. But if I could have the next slide. When we try to do something about this as educators, we try to introduce to young people some sense of moral purpose that will encourage them to have a commitment to compassion. And that's the word I want to emphasize, Your Holiness, the idea of commitment. As I said, every young person naturally feels somewhat compassionate. They have an impulse. But to make that impulse into a true commitment, they need a sense of purpose. Teachers can introduce children to examples, inspiring examples of people who have purpose. And this will bring young folks alive. This will bring their minds alive. Children themselves, though, need to make their own choices. You can introduce to a child a lot of good examples, but each child has their own sense of calling, their own sense of what fits with my own identity, my own destiny. And so you can't force a young person to take on a certain purpose. You can introduce it. And young children will gravitate and find it among all the choices that are offered. But it's very important for teachers to offer children examples, because otherwise children don't have any idea of what's possible. And what parents can do is support those choices. We have found in our research that most children do not imitate the purposes that their parents themselves have made, and they often find their purposes outside the home. But parents are very, very crucial in supporting the choices that children have made and giving children the resources to help expand those purposes into true commitments. So my hope is, Your Holiness, that a lot of young people who have participated today, the young people this morning, have been introduced to you as an example, a very inspiring example. And that doesn't mean they're all going to end up being a Buddhist monk. But it could be that the example that you've given will inspire them to make their own choices that are also compassionate and also have a commitment that will be lifelong in nature. Thank you.
Would you like to trade spaces, or did you have a question?
I do have a question, Your Holiness. And the question is what we can do about the children, if you remember, in the 25% who seem to have no interest. What can you do to reach and to move a person who seems to be seduced by momentary pleasures and power and status and all of the things that bring you away from compassion? The people that are the furthest away, how can you reach them and move them?
Anda dinalanda disu tongsuke Ningji sora daji sangbo yondengi penyuk chalma sheba sushtuge nanda disu tongsanda tegi didi dadi mebe gyonjaba Ningji pong gyon kara yomi dadi bena nga zuyanda denshi sunyu zane dungen xie na gunju bongdo ligorwa wada diji mendo sometimes di kasori pege Yebe gezen, kesan, mebe kyong gyon, those step with us.
It's a personal observation, you know. The statistics that you presented among children, adolescents,
and also other presentations.
And also some of the presentations by the preceding speaker, panelists, seems to suggest that there's, you know, that as to the pros and cons of having pro-social, compassionate behavior and action, it seems to be fairly obvious. So on the one side, there are the downside of not having cultivated these pro-social and emotional behavior and habits. On the other are all the positive benefits of having cultivated these. So this is, in a sense, a good way of conveying the value of these emotions to children.
So if you see people get the sort of impression, if you have compassion or more moral ethics, yes, wonderful. But without that, okay, we can survive. So in that case, we must make clear all the troubles, including terrorism. Now, every government, every people now taking, I think, the full care about terrorism, isn't it?
Yeah.
But these measures, it seems to me, temporary measure. All these destructive human actions come from the hatred or negative emotion. So if you make sort of a presentation, both sides benefit, and without that, what harm? What
are the disadvantages, the shortcomings?
Then people get the impression, this is not my choice.
Okay.
We have to work hard to bring more compassionate society. Yeah. Otherwise, this kind of trouble will increase. Then on top of that, nature disaster. And millions of people suffer, lose their possessions, their home. If the other side, more people willing to help, then these people, although they lose their home, their poverty, properties, possessions, these things, but fulfill mentally, emotionally. So I think even the nature disaster, which is beyond our control, not a man-made problem, but nature disaster, but the consolation way. The consolation, again, I think not only giving money, but genuinely showing the concern or care. This is my...
Yes, so I guess the job of the educator is to communicate to even the most difficult children both the benefits of compassion and also the disasters of being uncompassionate. And that's a difficult job, but that I can see, that's a very inspiring call for educators to do that. And that is hard work, but I can see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Thanks.
Our next guest is Reverend Dr. Martin Brokenleg. He's the Director of Native Ministries and a Professor of First Nations Theology at the Vancouver School of Theology. He is an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe of South Dakota and practices the spiritual traditions of his people. He has degrees in psychology and theology. He is the author of many articles about First Nations culture and on youth at risk, troubled children, troubled youth. Using Aboriginal imagery, Martin will share with us some universal needs that all children have, probably that we all have.
Your Holiness, thank you. As was just said, I do write at the point at which psychology comes together with First Nations culture. Because we found a point at which the very child care philosophy that my people have used for several centuries in fact meshes and is verified by psychological research. So my co-authors and I read the psychological research, but we don't talk about it very much because we're usually out talking to ordinary people, working with teachers, working with parents, working with youth workers in a variety of places, because we're interested in promoting resiliency, that is, strength on the inside, strength of heart. And, of course, this requires, in the first place, being positive, but it requires something different from knowledge. It was pretty clear to us that knowledge is the education of a person's mind, and words are enough for knowledge to be conveyed. But to convey something deeper requires direct experience. So you might say not theory, but practice, action, actually doing things. So we know from huge amounts of research exactly what it is that creates strength on the inside. Now, I just need to take a little pause there because what we have found as well is that there is a real attraction to First Nations thought and to First Nations imagery. So in our book, Reclaiming Youth at Risk, if I could have the first of my only slide there, you will see that we use Aboriginal art and circles, because my people also use circles to explain. We talk about 4 universal needs of belonging, which is on the right, mastery, which is at the bottom, independence on the left, and generosity above. And so I want to come back to those. But I can walk into schools in the U.S. and talk about these. I can walk into schools in Canada and talk about these as well, for reasons that aren't quite clear to me, because in U.S. law, there is the principle of separation of church and state. And so religion is not exactly forbidden, but pretty close in most of those environments. Now, in Canada, if something starts to sound religious, what I've discovered is Canadians back up real fast. And I don't really know why. I do know, because I ride the bus, that if I open my prayer book on the bus, I always have the seat to myself. If I'm reading other kind of literature, somebody will sit next to me, but not if I open a prayer book. I really don't know why that is. So I suppose because First Nations cultural ways are deeply spiritual, it seems to be acceptable to people. So it might be a key for figuring out how we can create strength of spirit in all young people. And as I say, these must be experienced. So we know from psychological research that every person inside has a need to be significant and important. And so we use the word belonging, that belonging experiences provide this for a person. And as I keep telling teachers and parents, you can't do this in words. My experience was that for the first time in my life, I was away from my parents overnight, the very first time. I was 17 years old. I had the opportunity to go away to a military high school, and so I did that. And came home from that school for Christmas holidays, had wonderful holidays with my family. It was time for me to go back to the school. I stayed at a downtown hotel because a blizzard was forecast to come in. Half a meter of snow, 100-kilometer winds, minus 30 temperatures. And there was a shuttle that was going to take me out to the airport that next morning. So I got up very early. I was sitting in the hotel lobby, and I saw this shadow pass through the swirling snow about a half a block away. And this person came up to the hotel lobby, pushed the door open. She stepped inside and shook the snow off of her blanket. It was my father's cousin. She lived probably 8 or 9 kilometers away. She had no car. She had walked at 4 o'clock in the morning in that blizzard to see me. She came up to me and she put her arms around me and she said, "Son, I heard you were going back to school today and I wanted to come see you. So how is your mother? How is your father?" So we sat down and we talked for a while, and she told me that she was proud of me for staying in school. And she said, "I'm going to think about you every day. I'm going to pray for you every day. You learn everything you can," she said. And then she wrapped herself in her blanket and she walked back out into the blizzard. Now, see, because she did that for me, I knew that I belonged. And so also with mastery. Mastery meets that need for our personal competency that small children have, that senior citizens who live in nursing homes have. We still need that sense of competency. I have one of my favorite accounts of that was a boy who was asked if finally all the problems at his school were taken care of. He was 10 years old. And his answer to the television reporter was, "Well, I don't know about that, but," he said, "I know if I've got a problem, I can fix it." So he had within that this understanding that he had strength of spirit. The third piece in our circle is the dynamic we call independence. We really mean self-responsibility. And so I think the job for most of us adults is to empower young people. And we have good, easy ways that we can do that and very complicated ways that we can do that. And the fourth piece in our circle that creates strength in a person is what we call generosity. It's really compassion in all of its different forms, because we know that real compassion, if it's genuine compassion, is going to hurt. If I'm simply, the example I always use is I say, if I'm giving a man a necktie that my aunt gave me last Christmas that I was never going to wear in public, that's even called re-gifting. It's not real generosity. So these four themes, these four themes are what we believe are universal in every human being, regardless of our religion or our race. This need for belonging, for mastery, for independence, generosity. And so the question I want to ask you, Your Holiness, is if you think this is true, do you think these are universal?
Really, I think, yes, I think so. Yes. 민주주의 되기 지도권 읽고 있어.
In order to create a happy human society, these are the very important elements that are required.
Harmonious, peaceful, friendly society. These are, I think, important elements.
Someone will have to tell me what the words are in Tibetan then.
그래서 It is translator's responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are you going to read that book right now? We can wait. Our next guest is Dr. Clyde Hertzman, and we asked Dr. Hertzman to be our last presenter today, our final presenter today, because he's not only going to talk about the remarkable research that he's been doing in child development over the years, but he also has a little bit of hopeful news for us about the idea of educating the heart on a global scale. Clyde is the director of the Human Early Learning Partnership at the University of British Columbia. It's also known as HELP. HELP has recently been designated by the World Health Organization as the Knowledge Hub on Early Development, and Clyde is team leader of the Knowledge Hub and the Global Knowledge Network, and I'm sure he'll tell us what that means.
Your Holiness, it's a pleasure to get a chance to speak with you this afternoon. As the last presenter, I'll try to show some compassion for you by being brief. But I do want to come at the subject of today's discussion of educating the heart from a bit of a different perspective. I'm trained originally as a public health physician, but my lifelong research commitment has been to what we call the social determinants of health. The social determinants of health means those factors in the places where we live, work, learn, and grow up that influence health and well-being. For example, in a country like Canada, we seek to understand why such a rich country as ours has enduring, persistent, and large inequalities in health, not only between the poor and the rich, but all the way across the spectrum of privilege from the least to the most privileged. One of the things that we know from research of many of us, including my research, is that child development plays a key role in explaining where health inequalities come from. And in particular, 3 domains of early child development matter: physical, language and cognitive, and social and emotional. Although I think of those as 3 domains of children's development. My commitment has been to highlight the importance of these domains in the very early years, before kids reach formal schooling, to study and publicize their impacts on health and well-being and learning and behavior across the entire life course, and to see what we can do to improve the conditions for early child development in our society and other places around the world. And this organization that Maria mentioned, HELP, the Human Early Learning Partnership, is a research organization we created for the province of British Columbia. It includes about 200 faculty and graduate students at 6 universities that does research on early child development on the population of British Columbia and for the population of British Columbia. The reason that this is relevant is that last year, for the first time, we were asked, HELP was asked, to step onto the global stage and to take on the role of Global Knowledge Hub for the International Commission on the Social Determinants of Health, which was set up by the World Health Organization. The international...
The physical health as well.
So by health you mean primarily physical health?
Well, that's what I'm coming to. The Commission's role is to collect evidence on a range of social determinants of health that can go way beyond physical health. And our role as the Global Knowledge Hub in Early Child Development is to provide to them reliable scientific evidence that they can use to go from country to country around the world and try to get countries to sign on to using a social determinants of health framework as a principle for development. And we're seeing some countries like Chile and Kenya, countries that have recently passed through dictatorship and are getting a second chance now, taking on this kind of idea. Anyway, this is where the issue of educating the heart, I think, comes in.
Yes.
Because of those three domains of development that I've been talking about, the physical, the language, cognitive, and the social and emotional, we already have existing international development efforts on the physical side in relation to survival and malnutrition, on the language and cognitive side on relation to access to school and programs of iodine supplementation to stop children from being born profoundly retarded. What we haven't had, though, is any international commitment in the social and emotional domain. And for all of the reasons that have come up here today, the social and emotional domain is clearly the basis upon which we can hope for some form of global empathy. And so our Knowledge Hub is making a priority of highlighting social and emotional development as part of its work. Now, as luck would have it, we've been given an opportunity to make this point forcefully on the global stage because of some changes that have been made to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. In 2005, the international community signed off on an addendum, if you'd like, to the convention, which specifically addresses the issue of early child development. And there's one key sentence from that addendum that I want to read because I think it's the thing that all the rest of it hinges on. And it goes like this. Respecting young children's evolving capacities is crucial for the realization of their rights, and especially significant during early childhood because of the rapid transformations in children's physical, cognitive, social, and emotional functioning from earliest infancy to the beginnings of schooling. This language, in effect, starts to make the right to grow up in an environment that nurtures social and emotional development a matter of international law. But really, the question is, how do we go from an abstract right to a reality for children? After all, as they say, if you take a bunch of politicians and you make them go to enough meetings, they'll sign anything just to make the meeting stop. So, up until now, Anyway, in order to make the Convention on the Rights of the Child real, up until now, what the international community has done is it's set up an international monitoring committee. And every country that's signatory has to come every few years and report. And the reports are hundreds of pages long on what the countries have done and what they've achieved in fulfillment of the Charter. So, for instance, something that was in the existing convention was that countries have to strive for equality of access to education for girls and boys. And every country has to come forward and report on what they've done and how close they're getting. And for those 159 countries in the world that receive aid from UNICEF and other international agencies, these reporting requirements are very important. The problem at this point is that this new rider on early child development goes way beyond the idea of simply counting the number of boys and girls going to school and reaches deep inside of intimate life, into the question of the nurturant environments that kids are growing up in, the sort of thing that the speakers in the earlier panel, Mary and Kim and the rest of them, spoke about. And as Tim Schreiber read from that quote, you know, the young child pointed out that they can make legislation that can say he can go to school, but how can they legislate friendship? And so the problem at this time is that the International Monitoring Committee doesn't yet know how it's going to monitor this new rider on the convention. And I, as head of this Global Knowledge Hub, have been asked to go to Geneva in about 3 weeks' time and provide advice on how they should proceed. And although I suppose it might be an unfair question, the reason the reason I raised this with you is that my question to you is really, I want you to help me do my homework. If you were asked to sit before a committee like this, with a task like this before them, what sort of thing would you suggest to them?
Oh, I don't know. I think it is illogical. More experienced person in a certain subject, you see, put question to one ignorant person. So, if you really want to answer, you yourself must find answer.
Your Holiness, we're drawing pretty close to this part of our discussion, and I know that so far we focused a lot on teachers as educators of the heart, and I know that we have a lot of people who are watching us and who are in the audience who are parents and grandparents who would also like to know about educating the heart. Is there something that you'd like to say to that audience in particular?
No, actually, yesterday, many occasions about this subject. So my motivation is, I'm just another contributor. And still searching the ways and means to promote these values, and then how to channelize these ideas into school system or education system. So, I'm not come here give some kind of answer. No. I think many occasions I suggested now time is come to set up some kind of body or group of people who have experience the concerns for today matter, field, and then research, more research work, and then find out what's the concrete, what's the evidence way. Evidence. Then, as you mentioned, you see when these moral ethics, if we rely on religious belief, then it will become further complications. What religion? So, we are talking universal value, humanity. So, on universal level, or humanity in general, I think the existing religion, their own circle. So, for example, Buddhism to Buddhist, not for Christianity, not for Christian, not for Muslim. Christianity for Christians, not for Buddhist. Of course, we can learn each other, mutual learning, mutual sort of exchange experiences. But otherwise, it's a different sort of tradition, different because of the concept. So simply, you cannot use for promotion of some universal value on religious basis. So we must find secular basis. So the scientific sort of data is the most important part. And then our common experience.
Shared experience.
I would say, in common sense, I think nobody disagree the warm-heartedness is
So nobody can dispute the point that compassion and love is good.
So now, I feel we need further research, then some small education institution carried this program, then eventually collect the result, convincing result or data, then make plan, perhaps more school, more university, more kindergarten, then may implement this program. Then meantime, often sort of seminars, meetings, teachers or concerned people from other countries come together, show them the result. Then perhaps, I think here, ultimately I think like UN, I think important, useful. But for the time being, I think NGO, non-governmental organization, I think more useful, more effective. And individual teachers, and teachers good way, a community, and also parent. So I have nothing to offer some kind of proposal. I myself, as I mentioned earlier, ignorant. I think everybody, I think like me, you see, easier to see faults, problems, but difficult to find answer. So we need more work. A present sort of education system and the way of because of the atmosphere of present society or way of life continue. I think we humanity, I think face still more difficulties. If this gap reach the poor increase and nature as a environment, damage of environment increase, I don't know, moral crisis increase. But we, older generation, in any way, next 10, 20 years, we can go this way. But then these younger people, I think we will face more problems. So I think we have to think I think should not take for granted our existing system. Everything is okay. Reality is changing. Time is changing. We have to find new ways or new method to deal with the reality. I think that's important. So for that, education, knowledge here is extremely important with self-confidence and honesty, and self-confidence and determination. Now, these very much related with warm-heartedness.
Thank you. Oh, there goes a baby. We move now from a global perspective that Clyde has presented, and I'd like to ask Lauren Maincourt.
Difficult question. Wrong question. I mean, question wrong to wrong person.
And I'm going to ask Lauren Maincourt to come up because we're going to move from a global perspective to a more local perspective, and we're going to put him a little bit on the spot as a politician here in British Columbia. Maybe tell us about some of the visions for our own province around educating the heart based on what he's heard today. What is possible? So, Lauren?
Thank you very much. And, Your Holiness, thank you very much for once again visiting Vancouver and bringing a message of hope and compassion to our community. Today we've had the opportunity to listen to a couple of conversations, one with a group of students speaking with the Dalai Lama, and another with some learned experts from around the world that are contributing to the education system by talking about and uncovering the good news about social and early learning and emotional learning in our province, but also in other areas of the world. I think it's very important that people understand that the good work that has been brought to us by people like Mary Gordon and Kim, the many other presenters that have been here, Clyde Hertzman, that there is an awful lot of talent right here in this province. People who are definitely working day and night to make sure that we have a that we are raising strong, capable children. Children that have an idea of what it's like to help someone, that there is something in it for them, to be able to work with community and try to solve problems. Most of what we've heard today has been about us just being human beings as natural as the babies that Mary Gordon brings to classrooms through the roots of empathy. This stuff is all in here and in your hearts as well. It's natural. And it is our duty to be courageous and speak about it in public and talk about it and encourage our friends and encourage our educators and encourage our politicians to do what is right. I am very grateful for the opportunity to be here today. Some months back, a group of Vancouverites visited with the Dalai Lama in Tucson, Arizona, to speak about the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. And just a few moments ago, we heard the Dalai Lama speaking about the need to research and prove to the world that social and emotional learning is important, that empathy is important, that the goodness that is in all of us is important, and we need to make it grow and flourish and bloom. And I see very soon in our future the creation of this center right here in Vancouver, in British Columbia, in Canada, and being a beacon of hope and learning and understanding for all British Columbians, all Canadians, in fact, all children around the world. That is the work of the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. And it's more than that. It's not just about research, it's about action. It's about getting in there and making sure that if we are teaching children to care about community, that we give them the opportunity to excel in their communities. I myself and the government of British Columbia are firmly behind these principles. This morning, the Premier and I had the great pleasure of visiting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama to talk about some of these issues. And we are very, very committed to ensure that the Centre happens in British Columbia and that we continue our hard work with social and emotional learning in British Columbia schools. We know we can't do that alone, and that is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that so many educators took the time to be with us today. We're going to make a difference in British Columbia, and I think that we can make a difference in the world. So in conclusion, Your Holiness, thank you so much for being here again, and I look forward to our next dialogue.
Thank you, Lauren. Now I ask for Mary, Kim, Mark, and Tim to make your way back up into the stage so we can all be here together to say goodbye today. And while you're making your way up, I want to let everybody else know that these conversations always seem too short. There's not enough time. And the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education has put together an amazing book, a commemorative book with essays by many of the people who are here today and more people that are very provocative essays and beautiful images. And one of the intentions of that is that you will walk away with this book and that it will stimulate more discussion between you and all of your friends and colleagues. And that book is for sale in the lobby. And all proceeds, of course, go to the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. So I wanted to let you all know about that. And I wanted to thank all of you for being here today, as those of you who are joining us by the webcast or those of you who are in the Orpheum. And maybe all of us could thank our panelists together. In just a moment, the Dalai Lama is going to be leaving, but our panelists would like to stay for another 15 minutes until 4 o'clock. They'll come down onto the floor. Mary Gordon will be selling and signing her book as well. But for now, please join me in thanking the Dalai Lama.
Should we just walk off?
Just wait till he goes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And there's everyone. Oh, a photograph, yes. I like photos.